Good afternoon, you wee bastard, and welcome back to another War Thunder video with Koala. So this is going to be a precursor video to my future tanks and War Thunder video, which is coming out tomorrow. In this one, we're going to do basically a refresher and go over each tech tree as it sits going into the next video, using all the suggestions I've made in the series up until this point. So if you don't quite know what's going on and haven't seen any of the videos in the series, I'll link it below. There'll be an annotation on screen. What we're going to do here is talk very quickly about the tanks themselves, but focus more on what the tech trees look like after those moves. If you want sources or information on why certain tanks are moving where they are, then go ahead and watch the relevant videos in the series, because that's not going to be reposted here. I apologise, but I just don't have the time. We're going to focus solely on the vehicles I've brought up in the series so far, without discussing anything new that comes above what we already have. There might be a couple of tidbits in between. I want to mention right now that this is all my own opinion on what will be balanced within the game, and does not reflect any leaked information from Gaijin or anything of the sort. I also need to say that obviously there will be some other vehicles like the Tunguska surface-to-air missile-equipped anti-air vehicle, and contemporaries of course, at the tiers we're currently talking about, but I am not very knowledgeable on this topic, so I've chosen not to even bring it up here. We'll also likely see vehicles like the M3A3 Bradley or M1128 Striker MGS in the American tech tree, and equivalents for other nations, but once again, this is not the video for that. We're focusing on just the rebalancing of main battle tanks according to the series so far, to make way for vehicles like the M1A2 and Leopard 2A5 in tomorrow's video. Now, when it comes to the recent ballistics change, I'm going to completely ignore it as if it never happened. I apologise. We're going to assume that all APFSD shells are accurately performing in-game, and I'll continue to balance these shells as if they were. Otherwise, I have to guess at what values Gaijin will give these shells in-game, and that's just not going to work. So if I say 530mm of pen will be balanced at a certain battle rating, keep in mind that the Type 90's JM33 shell should already have 530mm pen. Last thing I want to say before we get started, now that we have tier 7 tanks announced, these changes could happen, but I do think that they should only happen when these current vehicles are starting to see up tiers to battle ratings of say 10.7, which once again is likely to happen this patch. If they're not seeing up tiers, then these changes are not necessary. We don't need to make the current 10.0s any more powerful. So to begin with, we're looking at the US tech tree. Really not much to be said here. The M1 at 10.0 should get the M833 shell as its upgrade shell now that M774 has been so heavily nerfed. M774 is now historically accurately performing, that's why I'm bringing it up here despite saying I wouldn't talk about the ballistics changes. With M774 as the stock shell and M833 as the module, with less than 400mm flat penetration, and a penetration at 60 degrees roughly equal to that of the German DM23 on the L44 gun, this would be balanced considering that up until the past few days, M774 has had as much as 415mm flat penetration. I think M833 with less flat but more angled penetration than the old M774 would be roughly the same in performance across the board, and would be balanced at 10.0. The IP M1 therefore has been moved up to 10.3, and at this battle rating should see the M833 shell stock and the more modern M900 as the upgrade shell. This is the shell that was used by M1 IPs in the Gulf Wars. It's also used today on the M1128 Striker mobile gun system. M900 has a performance level just below that of DM33, seen in game on the Type 90 as JM33, having slightly less flat penetration at 510mm and quite a bit worse angled penetration. However, JM33 in-game is still underperforming at 60 degrees. It should be up around 312mm. I think at 10.3 this tank will be balanced. That means that it can't ever see 9.0s like the T62 M1, and the increased firepower will help it remain relevant when we have tier 7 tanks in the game. This is not enough penetration to go through the C-Tech Leopard 2A4's turret shakes, keep in mind. Also, for the US tree, the M60 Rise should go down to BR 8.7. We've been saying that for ages. It certainly belongs there. People have questioned the ability for it to get M774 and even M833. I've talked about this in the past, but given the performance of the tank outside its firepower, increasing its penetration wouldn't really be enough to make it a real worthwhile machine to play, and giving it overkill penetration just makes armor even more irrelevant for surrounding tanks like the T62M1 and T64A. No, I think a better idea is just to down tier it and leave the shells as is, but let me know your thoughts on this in the comments, of course. Side note, if we were to get the M3A3 Bradley, I think that would go at either 9.3 or 9.7, and the M1128 MGS could sit at 10.0 in the light tank line after the current M3 Bradley. Also, the XM1 should be up tier to 9.3 where it belongs. Now we're on to Germany, and this is where the biggest changes are. I think you wearaboos are going to be pretty happy here. So the Leopard line has been extended quite a lot, and we're starting with the A1A1 at 8.3. I suggested in the Leopard 1A5 video how this could be done, with the DM23 APFSD shell being quote-unquote removed. You'll know what I mean if you've seen the video. The tech tree then leads into the Leopards 1A3 and 1A4, bracketed at battle rating 8.7. These two tanks are extremely similar, certainly in worth order terms. It may not even be worth us getting both of them, but they would fire the exact same shells as the Leopard A1A1 while being faster, more maneuverable and having better armour. Not that that really matters on a Leopard 1, especially at this tier. Next up is the Leopard 1A5, and this is what my video on this topic was leaning on. See, the Leopard A1A1 and Leopard 1A5 are visually near identical, and rather than remove a modification from the A1A1, something that Gaijin said they cannot do, they could change the current A1A1 into the 1A5 and give it all shells but DM23 stock and make DM23 a tier 1 modification to ease the stock grind, and then release the A1A1 as technically a separate tank back at 8.3, just without actually calling it a separate tank. Technically, you'd be releasing the same tank twice because it's the A1A1 that has become the 1A5 rather than the 1A5 being the new addition, but I think that would be okay, and it would be a really convenient way of balancing what is currently a difficult tank to balance. After the 1A5, we see the Leopard 2A1. Now, the easiest way to explain this tank is that it's 100% identical to our current Leopard 2A4 in functionality. And it's extremely similar in the visual model. There's only a couple of very minor differences. Our current Leopard 2A4 has B-Tech armor, which is identical to the armor of previous Leopard 2 variants, and although it has the collimator on the end of the barrel, which was only fitted in the 1990s, does not fire the DM33 shell from 1987. As such, there would be no difference at all between the Leopard 2A1 and Leopard 2A4 if it were added right now. And so I think the Leopard 2A1 makes for a good 10.0 alongside the M1 Abrams, while the B-Tech Leopard 2A4, which is actually from the year 1994, could be given DM33 and raised up to 10.3 alongside the IP M1 with M900. This would be named Leopard 2A4 B 1994, relating to its B-Tech armour and its model year, in the same way that the T64A has in brackets 1971. The Leopard 2K has been moved over to the line featuring the Kampfpanzer 70, staying at the same battle rating, and the Leopard 1A6 with its applique composite armour added into the tech tree before the KPZ-70 at a battle rating of 9.0, and would fire the 120mm DM13 APFSDS and DM12 HEDFS. I did bring up in the Leopard 1A5 video the possibility of it also receiving the DM23 shell and going up to 9.3, but like with the M60 Rise, I'd rather leave the shell off and keep it a little lower, especially with new tanks coming in above battle ratings of 10.0 where this thing will not need to be up tiered anymore. 9.0 tanks are going to get some really favourable matchmaking this patch. This gives us a full prototype line with the Leopard 1A6, KPZ-70 and Leopard 2K, and the only thing missing is the Leopard 2AV. Well, this is because I can really see the Leopard 2AV coming as a second German top tier premium. I mentioned this yesterday in the Challenger 2 devblog video. I can really see all nations getting a 9.0 plus premium, while America could get a sub 9.0 premium like the M60A3 after the XM1s move up to 9.3. The Leopard 2AV could be a good option for this, but otherwise it could come in at 9.3 in this line too, after the KPZ-70, and maybe put the Leopard 2K folded in with it. I also mentioned in the CR2 video the possibility of getting an East German T72M premium at 9.3. This would be functionally identical to the T72A in-game, so if this happens, then the Leopard 2AV has even more of a place in the tech tree. The Leopard L44 has been moved up to 9.0, so long as the XM1 is moved up to 9.3, then the prototype Leo definitely belongs at 9.0, so there we go. By the way, I'm saying for all this that 10.0s and above should move into rank 7. I feel this is likely anyway, the same way a bunch of rank 5s like the Chieftain Mark III or T62 moved into rank 6 when the first rank 6 tanks, the T64A and MBT KPZ-70 came. If rank 7 starts at 10.0, I feel like this works well. I've mentioned in the past the idea of spacing out battle ratings, meaning that our current top tier would move all the way down to 12.0, but we're not taking that into account for either of these two videos. I hope that comes in future, but we're not going to worry about that right now, otherwise this would get really confusing. I also think that the gap in lines shouldn't exist, meaning that players can't research the M1 Abrams without first researching the preceding XM803, and players can't research the T64A without first researching the preceding T10M. Now it's on to Russia. Not so much to change here. So basically, I'm just going to paraphrase what I said in the T80BV video. Rather than getting the T80B with a Contact 1 module and getting the T80BV as a separate tank, we should get new shells for the T80B instead of the ERA. The tank would lose the Contact 1 modification, but rather than simply removing something that people could have paid for, not that I suspect anyone really did, Gaijin could simply swap that module for the 3BM29 APFSD shell with 520mm flat penetration, and the T80B could also receive the 3BM26 with 490mm flat pen somewhere in its modification line, while the 3BM22 would become its new stock shell, replacing the 3BM15 it currently sees stock. This then allows for the T80BV, with its 5-layer composite armour and Contact 1 ERA, to come in at BR 10.3 and not be quite as samey as the preceding tank. The T80BV at 10.3 would also see the upgraded 3BM32 Vant, which is Russia's first monoblock long-rod APFSD shell. This shell is quite odd in that in rolled homogeneous armour equivalent, the penetration value given in War Thunder, it would appear to have less penetration than even 3BM15. This is because this specific shell is much better performing against composite targets than it is against RHA, and a good indicator of its penetration value against an actual composite armoured target like the Leopard 2A4 is 560mm, which is backed by Fofanos data. This is roughly the same as the M829A1 shell fired by M1A1s in the Gulf Wars. This means that it could penetrate the turret cheeks of the Leopard 2A4 with C-Tech armour from very close range, but not at any kind of range beyond a couple of 100 meters, thus easily keeping it relevant once new higher BR tanks come into the game. It's quite difficult to understand, but just think, if the tank had a stated 550mm effectiveness in rolled homogeneous equivalent armour, then 3BM32 Vant shell can still penetrate it, while if it were actually 550mm thick in pure steel, it could not. A lot of modern tanks have weird values like this, particularly the Russians. They're bloody confusing sometimes. I'm going to throw this little bonus tank in here rather than in the next video, but the T72 Ural could come into the game at a battle rating of 9.0. This tank has pretty much the same armour effectiveness as the T64A while being slightly faster, and would fire the 3BM9 and 3BM12 shells both seen on the T64A at battle rating 9.3, although it would not have the T64A's best shell, the 3BM15. This gives it a max penetration just under 400mm. I've also said before that the T64 with its 115mm cannon could also come in at this battle rating. Now it's on to Britain. So the first thing to say here is that I left out the Vickers MBTs. Reliable info on these is really hard to find. The Mark III M would likely make a good 8.0, 8.3 maybe, or the Mark IV Valiant could come in somewhere between 8.7 and 9.7, and the Mark VII could come in at 10.0, but once again, data is really hard to find, so they're very difficult to balance. I've chosen to leave them out here. The Chieftain Mark X has been lowered to 9.0, it's easily balanced there with the T62 M1 sitting there, and the Challenger Mark II has been replaced by the Challenger 1 Mark I. There is really very little point to having both the Mark II and Mark III if the Mark III doesn't get any additional shells, so the Mark I at 9.3 with L23 as its top shell rather than L23A1 would be quite balanced, much more of a competitor to the T64A and MBT KPZ-70s than the Chieftain Mark X, given how completely irrelevant the Chieftain Mark X has become since patch 1.77. This does mean that Gaijin is removing a modification which they said they can't do, but in this situation I honestly couldn't find a way to work around it, so I guess Gaijin can figure something out. In armour and mobility, the Challenger Mark I is identical to the Mark II, besides the lack of the thermal observation and gunnery sight, or TOGs, on the upper left hand side of the turret cheek. The Mark III has been left where it is, even with the addition of the 460mm penetrating L26 Jericho depleted uranium APFSDS shell. This is substantially worse than the AMX-40 shell at the same battle rating, the AMX-40 also being a much faster tank with a 20mm coaxial, so it's easily a better performing tank within the meta of the game, and so I think the Mark III, even with L26, could still sit at 9.7. But if you want to argue 10.0, that's completely viable too. I think in Sim, the Mark III with L26 would be quite worthy of a 10.0, but I'm not very experienced with Sim, so I can't really say. Either way, it would barely make a difference, but there you go. I've also made its add-on armour package a modification rather than being on the tank's stock, as this fits more in line with the way Russian MBTs at this tier get this, as does the Warrior in the British tech tree, in the heavy tank line for some reason. The Challenger 2 should sit at a battle rating of 10.3. I've spoken heavily about its capabilities in the past and why it should be at 10.3, just know that as soon as you put it at 10.7 it becomes completely useless, with even its strongest turret armor being penetrable by everything and its shells having the worst penetration of the tier, along with it being the slowest MBT around. The tank has to excel in at least one of those three regards to be good, and at 10.3 it would have good shells and very good armor on the turret cheeks and upper hull, but of course the name of the game is mobility and everyone shoots for weak spots like mantlets anyway. I believe 10.3 would be a balanced spot for it, but if you believe differently, comment below. Next up is Japan, where this whole series started, and when I made one of the most embarrassing mistakes of my career. So the Type 90's armor is actually pretty much accurate in game. The only inaccuracy is the way Gaijin's physics engine models composite armor in general, but it's the shell that is not performing up to par. As I said, I'm going to assume that the ballistics update didn't happen, and say that the Type 90 should have 530mm flat penetration, but was always missing angle penetration, which should be around 312mm. Couple this with the very fast tank and 5-second autoloader, which could even be sped up to 4 seconds if need be. Some sources claim it to be quite a bit faster than that even, and the tank could sit at 10.3 easily. It isn't currently the best 10.0 tank, but the fact of the matter is that its weaknesses are not any more profound at 10.3, and its shell is currently overkill and would still be very good at 10.3. So if the IPM1 and Leopard 2A4B are moving up, this tank can too. In its place, the prototype STC. Now this tank is really quite difficult to find information on, and there were multiple variants that could be added. Firstly, an early prototype with a choice of domestic Japanese made cannons, either a 120mm that would later be developed into the gun found on the Type 10, or a 130mm. Unfortunately, I have absolutely no clue what shells would be fired by these guns, what kind of penetration rates they would have, so I can't really say much on these. As for armor, once again, I don't really have the knowledge to say accurately, but reportedly it's roughly equivalent in overall effectiveness to that of the Type 90, although with a bit of a different layout. This tank could easily fit at 9.7 or even 10.0, and it's entirely possible we get two variants with the two different guns, one at each BR. What could also be added in lower in the battle ratings is the Type 74G Kai. This is a late modification of the Type 74, which would pretty much be identical to our current in-game one, besides having an upgraded Type 93 APFSD shell. This would have almost 450mm penetration, making the tank a decent 9.0 to maybe even 9.3. I did mention adding this tank as Japan's 9.0 premium to answer the XM1 and the others, but I honestly think Japan needs this in its regular tech tree, and it should fill the gap relatively well. And that's going to be it. For Italy and France, there's nothing that's been changed in preparation for the next video. The one thing I'll say is that the AMX32 with the 120mm smoothbore cannon could be added in at 9.0 or 9.3, preceding the AMX40, but the AMX40 will still be the top tank until the Leclerc. That tank will be a massive jump up in battle rating, which is never a good thing, but I don't think there's really anything that could fill that gap, so for now there's nothing about the tree we need to bring up in this video. Well, there you have it lads, that set the stage for us for tomorrow's video. This is what the tech trees look like now in my little spreadsheet plan, and tomorrow we're going to talk about further additions beyond these. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments if you have any further information you want to bring up, any balancing propositions you want to discuss, or if you just straight up disagree with any of these suggestions, let me know down below. I hope you have enjoyed this video lads, and that you leave a like if you did, subscribe if you haven't already, hit that notification bell, join the 360 squad, because tomorrow we're going to be discussing truly modern tanks in War Thunder, extending the battle ratings all the way up to tanks like the Leopard 2A5, M1A2 and T90M. That's a long awaited video that I'm real excited to get to. I hope you lads are too. Remember to come follow me on social media and join the koala tree at the links in the video description, and while you're at it, be sure to check out my Patreon if you would like to support the channel further. I really appreciate it. Anyway, always remember lads, keep your bagpipes to hand, keep your kilt on, and I shall see you tomorrow in the next video. I say a wee thank you to these lads for supporting me on Patreon. DA261, Latvian Wolf, Gisli Gararson and Dark Recon. You lads are bra. If you wish to join them, come check out the link in the description below.